All right, we're good.
Okay, cool. So if I could have you all one at a time explain give us your name, your college, and
What you're running for?
what you're running for, and doesn't matter who goes first.
Yeah, sure. Do you all have a pen? Or anyone? Pencil, yes. That works.
No?
Thank you. So name, college, and what we're running for?
Yeah, and year.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
thank you. We'll start. Yeah, sure. My name's Hector. I'm from Powell College, Howie, and I'm running for Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm a third year.
So, hi everyone, my name is Adi. I'm a third year from Porter College, so right here. I am running for the position of Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, and I use they, them pronouns.
And then, so Hector, what are some things that you like to do outside of politics and school? Like, what are some hobbies and interests?
Yeah. So I'm big on biking. On my free times, I'll usually go on long bike rides with friends. Uh, like soccer, I love soccer. I love just going into our backyard here and going on long hikes. And those are the three main things that I like to do.
Thank you.
So things that I'm interested in doing include sleeping, eating, and not really moving around. I don't like moving. It's just who I am as a person.
Thank you.
Let's start off with Ali, and the question is, can you just name one issue you're very passionate about, and kind of just dig into, why it's an issue and what you plan to do about it next year?
Okay. So one of the issues that I think is of extreme importance here on this campus is centering the voices of the queer and trans people of color community here on this campus. Because this group of students are students who are multiply marginalized. They experience a lot of racism from within the queer community. They experience a lot of homophobia and transphobia within the populations of students of color. And that's something that I really want to work on. It's actually something that I've been working on for the last 2 years in my involvement at the Cantu with Familia X, which is a queer Latinx space on campus, as well as the queer and trans people of color collective. In order to kind of create a safer space for these students and center their voices, I really want to get them involved in a bunch of different things, including trying to get as many of their voices into student government. I think that's something of most importance. I think that on top of that, I also want to just create spaces for these students all across campus through events such as movie nights, community dinners, things like that, to again bring this sense of community within this marginalized community so that they know that they have the support of their peers in whatever it is that they're doing.
Hector?
Um, so I think the biggest issue that I'm the most passionate about is about underrepresented students' success here at UC Santa Cruz. Um, a lot of the work I do involves outreach to local schools and communities, bringing kids from underrepresented backgrounds from schools such as Salinas, or schools in Salinas, Watsonville. Um, we bring them into campus and we coordinate these field trips where these students are able to talk to a panel of students um, who are highly involved in STEM, um, where these students can ask questions relating anywhere from just college experiences in general, or major specific questions, or research related questions. So, and these students are often, almost always, students of color. So they're students that these middle schoolers or high schoolers can relate to. They're able to visualize someone who's like them, and they can relate to them and say, wow, this person has been able to go this far in their career, and they've been successful despite all of these obstacles that I myself experienced and my peers experienced. maybe I can be like them. Maybe I can go as far as them. And then also within these field trips that these outreach efforts, we coordinate lab tours where I work along with a lot of faculty, and I facilitate tours. Like the most recent one, we've gone to the Hauser lab, we've gone to the Sullivan lab, and then some other labs with the undergraduates who are on the panel. So a lot of students in general, not even from underrepresented backgrounds specifically, they've never been exposed to what college is like, or what someone successful, someone who's successful in their career, what does that all entail? So these lab tours exposes these kids um, to those aspects of being a student here at UCSC. And through these experiences, these students are able to visualize someone like themselves, and they can be inspired to, first of all, reach the UC, and once they get here, they'll know I should be involved in research. I should be involved with my faculty and really get to know them to be able to be more successful.
Okay, I have a question for Ellie. Do you believe that the ethnic orgs on campus are supported enough monetarily by the school, and especially through facilities which are provided for them, with the SUGD measure coming with these elections about how much money they're going to have to provide these spaces?
So, in my opinion, I do not think that the university supports these ethnically student organizations as much as they should. I think that the university definitely does try to work on things. A really cool thing that's happening right now is UC Santa Cruz is being labeled as a Hispanic serving institution, I believe that's the word for it, or the phrase. So there's really cool things that they're doing to do that, but they're not doing enough to fully support students here on this campus. From my conversations with students within a lot of these different spaces, they have to fight a lot with administration to get the things that they need, to get the things that they need to help their entire community here on this campus. So I really do believe that the university needs to invest more in these students, in these organizations, and provide them with a lot more support for them to go out and do the work that needs to be done.
So I don't believe there's enough funding to help students. Actually, a lot of the funding that helps students comes from outside sources. A lot of the funding that comes for STEM programs comes from the NIH and the NSF. I actually, just this past week, I met with Pablo, the EOP director. We recently received 2 grants from the NIH for serving Hispanic students specifically. And the phrase Hispanic serving institution, it's really, there's not a lot of meaning behind it. All it means is that your school has 25%, 25% of undergraduates are Hispanic. It doesn't entail that you specifically focus on helping those students. So the fact that we need outside funding from the NIH and NSF, and that's one of the primary fundings for these students, is kind of outrageous. So yeah, I don't think there's enough, and I think that's one of the big things that I want to push on. I want more student support, and I want more funding to help these students.
Any more comments on something?
Okay.
Forgive me, I lost my voice.
That's okay.
I had a question about, so Kresge Pride is coming up, and last year we had some issues with the trans community not feeling welcome and not feeling represented, and that was true. They were not well represented. And so I would like to know what you would like to do to help them
think I'm aware that they were one of the main groups that felt like they weren't incorporated into the campus. They feel like they felt like there was some sort of discrimination or bias against them. And one of the main things that I would like to do is get more feedback of what we can actually do. And I think a lot of that work will be in surveys, reaching out to these students is the main thing. And really, once we get that feedback, I'll be able to move forward and actually help them. But I know I know they need help, and I want to do as much as I can to help them. Yeah.
So okay, so in terms of the happenings that occurred last year, there was a lot of different issues kind of tying themselves together as to why these students felt the way that they did. As a member of the trans community, as a gender nonconforming person, I echo a lot of those same. I see the same problems that they see. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There has to be a lot of educational stuff done in terms of educating the university, the staff, the administration, students, professors on gender neutral language, on how to not be transphobic and stuff like that, because our society inherently is transphobic, and that's something that really we need to work on to a really large amount. And I think that as a member of the trans community, I think that I can definitely bring in this the voice of these students into student government to really get student government to help these students.
Hector, any more comments on?
Yeah, I would say I think I'd just like to highlight again that there's seems like both of us there's not really much known of what they need, and I think the biggest thing is just having the outreach, get the voices back, and a lot of the work I did on the Chancellor's Diversity Advisory Council kind of reflects what you were saying about. So a lot of the work was incorporating gender inclusive bathrooms, and I think that's one step forward, but it's just one of the small steps that towards that bigger goal of making them feel more welcome and incorporated into the school.
Any more comments on the subject?
I don't necessarily think that there needs to be outreach done to get these student voices, because there's a lot of students already who talk about these issues, and these students are kind of like blatantly ignored. An example of this is there was a proposal done at SUA that was inherently transphobic, and I called it out as being inherently transphobic, but people weren't necessarily listening, and the debate raged on about this specific bill for like 2-3 weeks, even though trans students in the space were basically saying that this shouldn't be a thing. So the voices of these students are already there, they're just not heard, and I think that's something that's really important to know.
Okay.
Let's go with Ellie. How will you help undocumented students, especially if Donald Trump were to be elected?
That is a really good question. So undocumented students on campus face a lot of issues in terms of financial aid, administration, how are they going to support themselves, things like that. I think that they are one of the groups of students that really need the most help on this campus in this moment. In terms of attempting, or how I would work on helping these students in light of a Donald Trump presidential win, that's a very scary thing to think about that I'd rather not think about. But I would do everything in my power to help um, put pressure on not only the California state government, or not only the local governments, but the California state government, and even if possible, the national government to protect these students at all costs. With the mass raids that were happening a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that I was kind of like thinking about was having some sort of bill passed by student government, basically saying that if campus were to allow like our agents on campus, we as students would not be down with that and make their lives a lot more difficult, in whatever sense you want to translate that. I think that on top of attempting to get these students more financial resources through the Office of Financial Aid, and through the offices of Blumenthal, of Office of Memphis, and stuff like that, would be kind of two of the ways that I would address that issue if that nightmare were to occur.
Hector?
Well, I know one of the biggest issues facing undocumented students is the fact that they aren't able to get public funding through national efforts because they aren't citizens. I have a lot of friends that aren't able to even get jobs here on campus because they're not citizens. And I think a lot of the answers to that come through looking through funding through other sources, primarily private funding. So what I would do is I would push for efforts to bring in those private fundings, and I would allocate certain funds from these private donors to make it so these undocumented students are able to pay for their tuition, and pay for food, and get through college, essentially. Yeah, and then as far as in the case of the Donald Trump presidency, I think the biggest extent that we can help these students is just working through our local governments, local police, making the environment here in Santa Cruz safe for them. As far as the national effort, there's not much we can do on that end, but we can definitely make a big impact at the local level here at UC Santa Cruz by working with administrators to make them safe here, and then also with the local Santa Cruz government.
Ellie, any more comments on that?
I think that we both have some pretty good ideas in terms of like thinking about the documented student population on this campus. I think that one thing though that we're gonna need to kind of just think about is that historically private donors who donate to efforts to help undocumented students here on campus make these students jump through a lot of hoops, are kind of like very problematic in nature. So I think just kind of trying to make sure that even just trying to get the private donors, but in a way that doesn't affect the well-being of the students through the fact that private donors can be very problematic in nature. And then another comment to that is that I do not believe that getting police involved in this issue is the best things, because undocumented students, from my experience interacting with them, do not feel comfortable around the police because whether it be that they're undocumented so they are scared of them being deported, but also being in the sense that they're students of color, if they're brown, brown bodies and the police do not have the best relationship. So I think it's really dangerous for students to get the police involved. But yeah.
Well, I think in general, undocumented students are really they're not really abrasive to the police. I agree with that, but the conversation has to happen. You know, you can't just not work with them because the relationship isn't a good one. The conversation needs to happen. And then as far as making students jump through hoops for private funding, I don't know what you're referring to.
way that they give money um, is done in a very problematic way in the sense of it being very white savior. Like, oh, I'm this white person who's helping this group of students, and look at me and how great I am, without actually listening to the voices of these students and what they specifically need and how they think that the university as a whole should help them out. That is what I mean by my comment.
Any more comments?
Um, well, I guess in general, if a private donor, if we ask for private donors, if we ask them to donate money, specifically serving undocumented students, I don't know what hoops they make the students jump through, but if they're donating the money for these causes, it seems like there wouldn't be any hoops to jump through.
So with regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, groups on both sides have stated that there's been a lot of dialogue so far, and that the problem still exists. Do you agree with this? And if not, what will you do to try to kind of fix, if not at least alleviate this problem in general on this campus? I forgot to start last. I'll just
Forget.
I'll just come like
Yeah.
So as somebody who, so I'm one of the lead organizers for Students for Justice in Palestine, and I have been for the last 2 years. I think this is an issue that is really important to me, and I'm really passionate about. So I have a couple of comments on this in terms of there being a lot of dialogue. There has been a lot of dialogue in the past, and while I agree that dialogue is important, we have to remember that dialogue shouldn't be done in a normalizing way. What I mean by normalizing is that a lot of times dialogue puts these two groups on equal settings, basically being like, this side has these problems, this side has these problems, but that's not necessarily the case. One group, the Palestinian group, is the one who is being oppressed within this. So we have to center their narratives within the larger dialogue of this issue. Can you re-say the question? That was a lot of words.
So the question goes, in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, groups have stated that there's been a lot of dialogue. Problems still obviously exist. It keeps coming up every year. First of all, the first question is there enough dialogue? And second question is, what will you do about it, especially if you're saying that dialogue isn't enough?
Yeah. So in terms of that, one of the things that I want to really work on is putting pressure on administration to actually actualize the divestment bill that was reinstated this last academic year, I believe in November. I think that's one of the major things that we can do as a community, specifically because the Palestinian community, as a community that is oppressed, is calling on a boycott of Israel and Israeli products. So I think that's something that's really important because we have to. I, as a non-Palestinian student, cannot say what Palestinian students and Palestinian activists should do. I can only listen to what they want us to do, and that's something that they want us to do to make divestment happen. Work on campaigns to educate the population within our university and things of that nature. So that's something that I will do. In terms of resolving the problem, I think there's a lot of very strong emotions on both sides, and I think that it's something that is extremely complicated and not easy to solve just by being like, I have this idea. I think that it's going to take a pretty long time to really come up with a concrete solution, because this is a problem that has been occurring since the first wave of settlers that started, of European Jewish settlers that started settling in what is now known as Israel in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's a lot of things that need to be detangled and stuff like that, and I can't really give a concrete answer as to how
think one of the biggest issues that comes with this topic is Islamophobia. Um, and I think what really needs to happen is we need to educate students on how to create a safe environment for these dialogues to happen. Because there aren't enough dialogues and there needs to be more of them. But often in these dialogues, people are very passionate about the issues, to the point where the dialogues aren't effective anymore because students feel attacked. Their religion gets attacked, and they no longer feel safe to be in the setting. So I think if we can educate students on, first of all, having dialogues in a safe in a respectful manner, where you respect both sides and you respect the people's opinions, I think that's the best way to have these conversations. And then also just efforts against Islamophobia is one of the biggest issues that I'd like to focus on, because in this time it's a very sensitive and pressing issue with this conflict, and yeah, those are the ways I go about it.
So, a little more on that. So, the question kind of implies that there's been a lot of dialogue. Do you agree with that, and do you think that there should be more, or is there more to kind of making a solution?
Well, if students still feel attacked, there should be dialogue. There definitely should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more comments on?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I think that Islamophobia is something that's extremely important for us to tackle on this campus. There has been a lot of things said to a couple of different students who uh, who are visually clocked as Muslim, Islamophobic comments, especially to Muslim women who wear the hijab. So I think that's definitely something that needs to be addressed to a really huge extent on this campus. It, I think that in terms of the Israel-Palestine conflict, while Islamophobia is something that is of extreme importance, there's still a lot of things that need to be talked about that aren't necessarily based on or that are contributed to by Islamophobia, but other issues such as queer washing or pink washing that happens, things of that nature. I think that's also something that's really important to talk about within this conflict.
So UCSD was just chalked again outside their ethnic resource center with pro-Trump messages, and students at UCLA just started an anti-trans campaign over gender-inclusive restrooms. How will you work with others to support underrepresented students across the UC system?
Well, I think as far as the working with other students, I think there needs to be a big organization effort amongst all the diversity groups here on campus. If we can organize all the groups and we can get the support of all the groups on campus towards a certain effort, I think that'd be the most effective way to go about things. And then as far as the gender inclusive bathrooms, or yeah. So I think there needs to be an effort into making that a less of a it just we need to have an effort to make that more of a conversation, to where students don't feel so against it. Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
I think both of these instances are instances of extreme heat on these campuses, and these are things that really need to be addressed, not just by those specific communities, but by us as well. I think that there has to be a lot more political action by students on this campus to put pressure on administration, to put pressure on students who have these feelings and things like that to really get things done within our community. I think that it's absolutely ridiculous that there is that at UCLA there is a group of students who are trying to work on this like anti-trans like ideology. I think that hate should not be supported on our UC campuses. I have very strong feelings about that. I think that we as students really need to put pressure on administration for allowing these things to kind of happen on our campus, and to further the movements of the students who are fighting against the people who hate.
Yeah, I just think there should be more push on administration to take stances against issues like that, so that they don't happen again in the future.
Given the nature of the office you are running for, what are your thoughts on registering students to vote automatically when they enroll in classes? And the biggest argument against this is that undocumented students may feel unsafe. Do you agree with that?
Okay, so my thoughts on this are complicated. Complicated. I think that I personally do not like the idea of people being automatically registered to vote. I think that that puts people in a situation that they may not want to be in. Political involvement is a right, not a mandated thing by our government, and I think it should remain that way. I think that the documented community does have a right to kind of be afraid of this automatic voter registration thing. I think that any form of government having more information about students and their citizenship and stuff like that is always a dangerous thing. So for that reason, I think that their voices do need to be echoed, and they need to be echoed a lot. I think those are my 2 things for now.
Well, I'm against that. I don't think students should be automatically registered to vote. If a student doesn't want to be involved in politics, they should have the right not to do it and have it not interfere with their education. Especially with undocumented students, if they feel uncomfortable with being registered to vote, they should not have to be required to be registered.
I think that I don't know.
Hector, how do you plan to include communities into the mix you don't identify with or have never been to the spaces of?
Yeah, sorry.
How do you plan to include communities into the mix you don't identify with or have never been to the spaces of?
It's a great question. So I've actually begun the work on this effort. Part of my work on the Chancellor's Diversity Advisory Council is I lead an effort to create an inventory of all the diversity groups on campus. Not an easy task. It's about a 6-person. So I lead a team of 6 people who reach out to all the diversity orgs, and so the way I'm going about it is reaching out to college diversity groups, so diversity efforts on colleges, and then major-related diversity groups, and then also the school in general. So with this inventory, what I want to do is get all of these groups on a common platform where they can have conversations together, and through these conversations we can get feedback from all of these groups, and you can see what's working in one group, what's not working in another. And through this feedback, we can use this information to help all the groups come together and improve all of them and create a collaborative effort to increase diversity either on a college level, on a major level, as far as school, or just campus wide. Yeah, so I think organizing them and bringing all them together is one of the most important things, because often if you talk to someone in a diversity group that's major specific or race specific, and you mention information about a different diversity group that focuses on something entirely different, they'll have no idea what it is. So the biggest thing is getting everybody aware and on the same page. Organizing is the biggest issue.
So I agree with that statement. I think that providing a space for students from different organizations to kind of come together to talk about their issues is something that's really important, because that way those students can go back to their organization and disseminate information in that way. I think that really the way that I can bring in these student voices is just kind of going to their spaces and listening to their concerns and being like, yo, this is what I am trying to do. What are your concerns in terms of diversity on campus, in terms of any form of racism, transphobia, homophobia that you and your community face, and things of that nature, and trying to echo those voices through my position. I think one of the jobs of the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion is to echo the voices of underrepresented and marginalized students on this campus. And that's definitely something that I'm going to try to do. It's something that I have a bit of experience doing. We here on this campus, myself and a couple of different students attempted to organize something called the Progressive Student Coalition, where it was basically a coalition of different progressive identity-based student organizations on this campus came together to talk about different issues, and we had a couple of different meetings. But unfortunately, that kind of fizzled out for various circumstances. But doing some sort of coalition building in that sense, I think, would be the best way to echo the voices of these students to the administration.
Yeah, just the most efficient way to go about it is to get the inventory of all the groups, get them all in the same setting, and then be able to have students access that information of all the groups that are available on campus and all the resources. That's something I'm working on, and that will actually be available in the next year.
For the audience, you can just write down questions here on any of these pieces of paper, and we'll try to get them out to Ken. Many Asian Americans feel like they are ignored, partly due to the model minority, or the fact that people view them as a model minority. What are your thoughts about this, and what will you do to help this group? Starting with Alexander.
So the model minority, myth, as I believe it's called, is something that really needs to be tackled. There's a lot of issues kind of revolving around that with when putting other minority communities
emails, in classroom settings. Every student has to go to classes. That's one of the best platforms to reach them on. But what issues specifically are you speaking about?
Personally, I feel like a lot of people don't know there are multiple types of boards on campus.
Uh-huh.
So maybe spreading those ideas out.
Yeah.
But just like nobody knows what events are going on campus. They go to class and then
Yeah.
they leave. That's all it is now.
Yeah. So yeah, that the inventory that I'm building, I hope that will definitely help with that issue. Just getting all that information available to students, and that's something I hope to have finished by next year.
And what are your ideas?
I think that our campus community definitely centers students who live on campus in terms of advertising for events and stuff like that. I'm not going to say that that's not a bad thing, and given the fact that our university is already so decentralized, it's already been difficult to bring the students on campus together for events. Bringing students from off campus becomes even greater difficulty. I think that having some sort of, at least in terms of events, some sort of like UCSC calendar type thing could be beneficial, where students are able to, different student organizations are able to put like their events on this calendar so the general student population can see what's happening on this campus. I also think that just kind of attempting to centralize our community a little bit more, trying to do as much outreach as we can in terms of media, so media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, stuff like that, as well as finding and building student space on campus to build kind of like a more centralized location for students. I think those were two things that I would tackle about.
Real quick, people listening live stream are having a hard time hearing it. The camera's kind of far away. Maybe a little bit of an effort to
Yeah, sure.
speak on that stage.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, let me bring closer. I just want to figure out how to bring closer to like literally being in your face. How am I do this? Wonder if it will go right here well. Okay. Come on. Work. It's a little bit sideways, but I think. Oh wait. I think this will.
Like a notebook.
You can do that.
Also, just grab one of those chairs and put it in front of the.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. No, we're doing it.
Awkward dancing.
Yeah. I can pull this back, I think. Sorry. Someone's gonna be watching this and be like, what the hell is he doing?
So that's still live streaming?
Yep.
It's gonna be all crooked like that?
Just trying to get it to not be crooked.
No.
Yeah, actually. Good? Alright. Yeah, we can do.
Okay, so I have a question, and we'll start with Ellie. Particularly for STEM majors, how do you plan to support the already existing programs such as ACE programs and STEM diversity in the success of minority or underrepresented students in the STEM majors?
I think that centralizing my thoughts a little bit. Okay, so there's a couple of like really cool organizations on this campus that work on diversity stuff for STEM that kind of work on diversity stuff. I think that just really supporting them and attempting to amplify their voices within administration is something that's going to be really important. I, as a non-STEM major, do not know much about STEM programs besides what some of my friends in these programs have told me. I think that I think just listening to their concerns and kind of going off of that, I know for sure that there isn't as much diversity within STEM programs as there should be. So working on a push to get students from different communities into the university to do engineering would be something that's really beneficial. I actually came to the university as a result of one of those organizations, which was it wasn't specifically for minority students, but it was an engineering program, so mathematics, engineering, and science achievement, or MESA. So through that, I was able to get to a university, but I think that I think we need to work on diversity issues and outreaching to minority communities within low-income populations in different urban areas and rural areas as well would be something that's of the utmost importance.
Hector?
As far as reaching STEM students, I think there are a number of things we can do at different stages in students' careers. And you can start this even before students reach UC Santa Cruz. You can have outreach to local schools, like what I've been doing. Show students that STEM isn't just for white students. There are students of color who are succeeding, and you can be just like one of them too. Once they actually come onto campus, there's actually a really big issue with student retention in STEM. So a lot of students of color will come into UC Santa Cruz, and there'll be STEM proposed. So you'll have this large amount of students coming into Santa Cruz in their first year, and they say, I want to be a STEM major. The interest is already there. And then once they actually get to really decisive points in their career, like Math 3, Chem 1A, Bio 20A, those classes where students have to meet certain requirements to be able to declare, there's a big drop-off of students of those STEM proposed. Around those classes, you'll have around a difference between around 25% when compared to white students in fail rate, which is very alarming. So one of the ways we can attack that issue is have counseling where these counselors can actually intervene. If a student gets a D or an F on a midterm, we should outreach to these students of color and say, what can we do to help you? And this counseling doesn't just have to be purely academic. It can be, we can create counselors that are able to look at these issues holistically. What's going on at home? Do you need other support? And actually, with these grants that I mentioned, this is one of the things we're actually going to be doing. We're going to get 2 new counselors that aren't just your regular academic counselors. They're going to approach these students in an intervening way. If the red flags are raised, if these students aren't doing well in these classes, a lot of the times you'll have the drop-offs in these STEM students around major declaration time, where they'll pass their classes, but they won't exactly meet the GPA requirement. So yeah, and then as far as getting students to be more successful while they're here, we should provide more funding so that students don't have to focus so much on working. We should be able to provide jobs where they can focus on their majors while also spending more time or devoting more time in their classes. And a lot of the STEM careers involve going to graduate school, and one of the ways we can improve on that is creating mentorship programs where we collaborate with administrators and faculty on getting these students of color into labs and getting them exposed to these experiences. GRE prep courses, just yeah. So those are just some issues or some ways that we can go about it.
I just want to comment on one thing. I think that doing outreach to students is something that's very important. Outreach in the sense of before they get to the university. But I think that's something that's also really important is, at least from my experience being in a high school that was 75-ish, 78-ish% Latino. A lot of the outreach that is done to students in these kinds of low-income, minority-based high schools has to do a lot with STEM and STEM majors. I think it's also really important to highlight that not all students that want to go to the university want to do STEM majors. So when doing outreach, also providing means for other kinds of outreach to be done. So for example, Rainbow Theater does outreach through the arts, which is something that's really cool. They go to low-income communities in the Bay Area and in LA. To do outreach through theater, through poetry, through dance, and things of that nature. I think that's also something that's really important to highlight, because I knew when I came into college, I came in as a STEM major, and I did that because I felt like I was under pressure by my high school and by my community back home to do a STEM major, because that's all that was like taught to me as a student and to a lot of my friends as students. So I think while that's important and needs to be pushed more, I think we also need to push outreach through the different other academic areas of the university.
Yeah, so the work that I do as far as increasing diversity in STEM is something that I don't see me doing exclusively for STEM once if I'm appointed. I'd like to carry on those ideals and that work into other fields as well, because I think that would translate into higher retention rates in the majors that students propose, and then retention rates through graduation, and then retention rates, and then admission rates into graduate programs if students choose to do so.
Kind of in the same vein, for little to no women in engineering majors, specifically computer science, computer engineering, what are some concrete, first of all, like, what are your thoughts on that, and secondly, what are some concrete things you will do with regards to that? Starting with Hector.
Yeah, so the fact that there's such a low amount of women in these majors is really alarming. I think at UC specifically, it's around 30% of faculty are women, which is extremely low. And then as far as actual undergraduates, it's even lower who are in those majors. And what I would like to do is work with the administrators who are part of those programs like WISE, Women in STEM, and carry out what I've done with the STEM in general, and apply that to programs like WISE that focus on increasing women involvement in those in STEM majors. So so that includes like the mentorship, the outreach, the constructive conversations that occur between faculty and students that allows them to see themselves in successful positions of the people that they're talking to. Yeah.
I think that really our society just as a whole is a very sexist society. I think that STEM as a part of the society is kind of like sexist in nature. There's a lot of ideologies that are taught to young girls from the ages of like 6, 5 that need to kind of be stopped. And I think one of the ways that can be done is through organizations of women in science and women in engineering and those fields, such as WISE, doing outreach to elementary schools, doing things like that, kind of trying to build the interest in science in young girls. I think that's something that's of extreme importance to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to highlight, that his ideas are things that I'm actually doing. I actually work with Zia Zola. She's the Genomics Institute. She's the director of the Genomics Institute of Office of Diversity. So yeah, I'd like to continue that work and then also expand on it.
So this is going back to the voter registration. With the regards to the opt-out option, does knowing that if people are uncomfortable with being registered to vote that they can choose to not be, does that change your opinion on whether or not this should be part of?
Could you repeat the question?
So does knowing about the opt-out option change your opinion on whether or not does knowing that people are uncomfortable with being registered to vote that they can choose not to be, does that change your opinion? Because earlier you were saying, both of you basically were saying that you don't think that this should be a thing because it can make undocumented students feel unsafe. Does knowing that there's an opt-out option change your opinion on that?
No, I think by default students shouldn't be registered. And if students want to vote, they should be able to make that choice themselves and not have to opt out to not be registered.
On similar veins, I do not like the opt-out system just because of the way that they were talking about implementing it was not in a way that I think should be done. I think that having an opt-in system would be a lot more a lot better. Instead of a student having to be like, oh, I have to think about clicking to get out of this option. They're just like, oh, if I want to register to vote, I can just opt in. I think that it is very important to get students registered to vote. I think that there has to be a lot of efforts done through the SUA office, through the office, through the internal office specifically, I think, and in collaboration with the external office, to get students registered to vote and to move students to register to vote by having voter registration in the quarry, in front of the dining halls and stuff like that. But I think that the manner in which the automatic voter registration wants to be implemented, or they're trying to get it implemented, has flaws in it, and it should be shifted.
Yeah, I mean, although I would like students to be registered to vote, and although I would like more political involvement, especially now that, with this political issue, Donald Trump possibly getting, or most likely getting, the Republican nomination, I'd love to see all the students of UC Santa Cruz be registered to vote. We have to respect that it's a choice to vote, and the fact that the school would like to register students automatically is just not okay.
So, what do you think of programs such as CRES, Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, Community Studies, and other programs? Also, do you think they could be improved? Yeah, Ellie?
I absolutely love those programs. I think that, in my opinion, they're the most important programs that we have on this campus. I think that community studies is something that is extremely important because community organizing and working with the community is something that people just do on a regular basis, and I think that improving skills of doing that is something that's really, really powerful. Because the community studies helps students address a lot of different issues on this campus, in the nation, in our society, in the world. So I think that's very importantly. I also think critical race and ethnic studies is of extreme importance because we have to learn how to think critically about race, about ethnicity, and the ways that those interact within our society. I think that we should be providing them with more funding because of how important these majors are to, I think, the well-being and to the growth of both UC Santa Cruz and the nation as a whole. because I really don't think that, like, I'm gonna have trouble phrasing this, but I'm just gonna do the thing. So for example, let's say that somebody is majoring in STEM. STEM is a great field. It's a very, very important field. They don't address a lot of the issues that have to do with race, with gender, with sexuality, with all of those things. And I think CRES kind of provides a balance to these areas. Community studies, the humanities kind of forms of provides a balance to the university and to who's going to be going out there and working in our communities. So I think that they're extremely important and they should be held to the same level of importance within the university as STEM majors, but because STEM majors are the ones at a university who are the most profitable to the university, they get more funding than the other programs, and I think that's something that's very important to change and have them on equal footing because they're of equal importance to our society.
I think that community majors should.
Oh, for sure. And we're back on the stream, but we're gonna take a quick break to set everything up. That's funny.
Follow that. I have two really big scabs on my nose right now, and I can't like do anything.
Go all the way down. You just kind of
hurts.
yeah. Let's see, your camera's taking some drops, hasn't it? Let's see if we can get this to work a little bit. Oh, I just saw some papers. I don't think. Do we have something to put this on so it's not like a big box would be awesome. Hold on. Get a. Perfect.
Apparently your phone didn't die, it just went flat.
Yeah.
Because when I started moving it around, I was looking at it. I just couldn't turn it over. Yeah. I'm really bad at technology. I'm just like, it didn't die though. It just took a little while for it to die. These two questions right now, so we have
Like, never even. It's like someone's gonna look at this screen and it's like me.
this one. So
Huh?
face down and then
Yeah, it's on.
this one.
So whoever's watching is
yeah,
watching.
I also have one.
You have
I
one?
think I bypassed
Okay.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you can do that.
You
should promote the event we're having on Tuesday.
Huh?
You should promote the event we're having on Tuesday.
Oh yeah. When is, so the first one's on.
We have the presidential one at 4, and then right after, starting at 6, there's a huge one.
Hello everyone. I would like to inform you all that on Tuesday at 4 p.m. there will be the presidential debate at the College 8 Red Room. Followed right after at 6 p.m. in Kresge 320, 20, 20, 20, 321 or 7?
I think it's 3.
In 320, you will see a link at the UCSC, the Presidential UCSC elections page on Facebook, which you should go like right now. It's critical. In other news, it's a nice day out, kind of. Not really. I'm trying. I have other things to say, and my co-hosts are not helping me. I didn't say that. I'd make a great newscaster. Can you imagine? It'd be a shit show every time. It'd be amazing.
There'd just be no news. It'd just be like me making a fool of myself.
Honestly, let's do this together.
Most
Yeah.
people
I doubt
are
if you do it yourself. Like live television would be like,
Or for like 6 hours a day. That's like your.
Oh yeah, the weather is sunny out and it's actually raining.
Yeah. It's just, we don't have windows here, so the weather is outside. We'll be back with you next week. Here at Useless News. Someone's here trying to listen to real issues and they're supposed to me
I'm getting the text from the line. Well, on the other side of this right now.
Awesome. Well, we're back in a second. We have our candidates back. We get them up here so I can leave.
Hello.
Oh.
Reservations all gone? I think there's one, but there's one. Oh. I think I. Can you hear me now? No?
Do you want to read this question, this last question? Because I might ask.
I was told, oh, yeah, you're loud enough now.
Awesome.
Should we check sound from over here?
Yeah.
Check.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
What?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you don't forget it. Oh, do you have it on there? No. Oh, question. Super secret question.
The last one.
Questions are super secret.
They usually do most debates last the full 2 hours. No, this is one of the longer ones. Yeah. This is the longest one so far, actually.
Oh yeah, more attention on us.
Does that look good to me?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Great.
I'll just ask one.
Anyway.
You ready?
Oh wait.
All right. Whoever. Oh, okay. Let's. I gotta go to the bathroom. It's all good.
Somebody join me so I'm not here alone.
This is yeah, that's fine. Maybe I'll ask a little differently, but in general, it's fine.
I don't know if they can answer it that way.
Oh no, it's an easy answer. That's
Oh.
the problem. I gotta make them more complicated.
Damn it, nobody was very good.
That's not bad.
Questions.
We go easy questions. What is your name? Are you sure? Is there a rebuttal?
I don't know. Honestly, sometimes I forget what my own name is, but you know, it's okay. It happens. Maybe.
Yeah.
Just to me, whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget how to spell my last name, and I'm just like,
I misspell my name all the time.
You can't spell anything I spell. It was like M-A-N-G, M-A-M. M.
Pull out my
Leslie.
AP.
Yeah.
This is me.
I've had problems spelling your last name. Yes.
M-A-G-A. It's easy to say, but people usually
On this day, 20 years ago, I don't know, I was trying to do a story, but I.
Ellie, what's your favorite type of
Stand-up
tree?
comedy.
My favorite type of tree? That is a very good question. I'm gonna choose not to answer that question. Actually, no, the weeping willow, because it cries like me. Anyway, just
Cat person?
My favorite type of tree?
I'm a cat person.
You should get a- you
Cat
should get
person
a-
for life.
after Santa Claus.
Dogs are great,
Oh.
but
No,
cats.
ethical question.
Wait.
Last
the
night my neighbor's cat stayed in my apartment. Is that wrong?
No. As long as the cat was there out of their own accord, you're fine.
I know.
What?
Do you want to know my favorite type of tree?
Yes.
Geometry.
I knew she was gonna say that.
Wow.
I like you. You're funny.
Try living in remote, sounds nice. Alright.
Geometry.
Okay.
You can also say pantry.
I like that one.
That would
more,
be my
actually.
favorite. That would be my Pantry. favorite. Pantry.
Okay, but that was
Okay, anyway.
We're ready. We're good. Back in.
No more puns.
Yeah,
No more
back in our
puns.
costumes.
We're good.
I'm gonna answer your question. Just think of that joke. It's so bad now. All right. Okay.
Okay. So we're back to the debate. I guess I'll address this question to Hector first.
Yeah.
With a major increase of students coming in next year, there becomes a great possibility that there will be a lack of space and/or facilities to be provided for the different ethnic orgs on campus. How would you, if elected, address such an issue?
Well, I think the housing space issue is one that's very pressing at the moment. As far as accommodating to these orgs, I think there are some spaces that are available for them to maybe not as a permanent setting, but just to be able to meet. There's a lot of conference rooms within even the buildings that I work in, like in Sinsheimer, the biology building where I do research. All the conference rooms in there are unoccupied from 5 to 8 a.m. in the morning. I think we need to make use of spaces like that so that these student orgs are able to meet. These spaces don't always have to be an official, rent out this room and pay this amount of money so that you can use it. If we go to the administrators and the faculty within these buildings, they'll be more than welcome to, or they'll be more than welcoming to have these orgs, especially if we volunteer just to clean up or, just clean. As long as we're clean and we keep these spaces sanitary, they should be able to accommodate us. And it's just the fact of looking for these buildings. There's not enough of the actual search for these spaces, but they're available, and I think we'd be able to use those.
I think that the university needs to provide spaces for these students to do their organizing and things of that nature. I know there was a very large outcry from a lot of different students when last year when the offices for some of the big 5 organizations were being moved somewhere else because they were thinking about putting them in a trailer up in Merrill, I think. And that in itself is highly problematic because these organizations students need to have easy access to these organizations. Students need to have easy access to these offices because these organizations are very important to students. They're important because they help build the community of those specific students. They're important because they help address issues that these students are facing. And I think holding them up in spaces that aren't spaces specifically for these groups cannot and should not happen. And if it were to happen, I would definitely fight administration on that 2,000%. Yes, those are my views.
Yeah, I think a more long-term fix would be to press for more funding for these spaces. In the short term, the fixes that would have to occur would be to accommodate to operation centers of these orgs. Maybe have a permanent center for these operation centers. But as far as meeting spaces, there are a lot of groups, there are a lot of spaces that will need to be acquired, and I think we're going to have to get really creative with finding these spaces, at least on the short term. But long term, there should be more press on the administration for that funding for those spaces. But yeah, short term, we got to be creative. We got to find these spaces because they're available. We just need to talk to the faculty and administrators of these buildings.
So how familiar are you with the Big 5 ethnic orgs and their histories?
I actually spoke at one of the Big 5 at. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not?
No, I just couldn't remember who went.
I mean, you already started, so.
Yeah. I spoke at with Sinai and some of their leadership. I don't know all of the orgs personally, but I have been involved with some of them, and I've worked with some of them before.
So I have not been part of those spaces myself. The Big Five are Metro Sinai, APSA, PISA, and FSA. I want to say it is, yeah, I got it right. And I haven't really been involved with those organizations before. I've been to a couple of Metro meetings. I'm actually working on something with one of the Metro chairs right now in terms of working on providing the space with trans kind of education and stuff like that. And I do know a lot about their history just because it's a history that I'm actually really interested in knowing. So even though I don't know the spaces, I know the history behind the spaces, and I have worked with a couple of the people within those spaces, some of the different groups, on a couple of different projects here at the university. So I'm fairly familiar with them, or as much as I can be without being in the space.
Okay. So many students feel uncomfortable with the police on campus. What do you see as the role of the VP of Diversity in advocating for these students? And what would be your most desirable outcome from working with the admin and the students on this issue?
I go first, right? Yeah. My highest goal in terms of that and working with admin is getting police off campus. I do not believe that police have a role to play on this campus, and I think that they should not be present on campus. I think that just given the police state that we are in right now, the hyper-militarization of different police departments across the nation, the racist nature of a lot of different police departments across the nation, and the racist prison to school to prison pipeline, I think that things in that area do not need to be on our campus. Some people bring up this whole idea of like safety and things of that nature. And while I agree it's important, I don't think that safety in terms of like, I don't think the police provide safety on campus. I have never felt safe around police, and I don't think I will ever feel safe around police. And I know a lot of students echo those sentiments as well. I think that, for example, the police that were brought out to the event that happened a couple of weeks ago, I think that was a very big mistake by the administration. The fact that they spent around $100,000 to bring in more police to our campus, bringing in 70 police officers from all of the different UCs is it's a big waste of money, and it's made students feel even more unsafe. I know a lot of students who that day actually stayed home because they didn't want to be on campus because of the presence of police on campus. I was actually, to an extent, one of those students. I had to come to campus late at night, but I didn't come during the day to my classes because I did not feel safe being around the police. And I think that one of my goals is going to be to try to get police presence on this campus lowered.
While I agree there's some negative sentiments towards the police by students, I think it's very extreme to say police should not be on campus. I think the advantages of having police on campus far outweigh them not being on campus, just for the sake of safety issues. And I think just because you don't like the police does not mean you should not include them in an effort to make this campus safe for diversity. As someone who assumes the role of Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, you shouldn't want to exclude people like the police just because you don't like them. You should be able to include them and have conversations, constructive conversations with these organizations to make a more inclusive and diverse environment, and not because you don't like them, exclude them from the conversation and just keep them out of the picture, because they're necessary.
I think that just given the fact that so many different student organizations, student leaders within these organizations feel so extremely about having police on campus, I think that really shows the fact that we should not have the police on this campus. I think that if students, given the state of our society and given the fact that our police state is hyper militarized, given the fact that black and brown bodies are being arrested at a higher rate than other racial ethnicity or other races and ethnicities, given the fact that we're trying to provide a space for students to succeed academically, we do not need the police there to put a weight on these students. And that is not to say that police are not necessarily important for things in terms of like major safety, such as such as I don't necessarily want to get dark, but for example, if there was to be a shooting on campus of some sort, police in that sense are important, are vital to the safety of students, but that does not mean that they need to be on campus or that they need to be just around students all of the time. What I mean by moving police off campus is not having as much police presence on campus and not really having them being within the university, kind of not having a University of UC Santa Cruz Police Department, kind of relying on the city of Santa Cruz one and things like that. That way, students are able to do what they need to do to feel safe on this campus.
Okay, I think there shouldn't be a reduced presence of police on campus. There should be a diversion in the focus of what they do. I think they should focus more on creating a safe environment, less on ticketing students for running stop signs or harassing students by setting speed traps or things like that. But studies show that students feeling safe or being in a safe environment or in a discriminatory environment affects their learning and development experiences or their outcomes, and it can have a negative effect on their learning. So last year in the campus climate survey, there were higher rates of students in the LGBTQ, genderqueer, and students with disabilities who experience unwanted sexual conduct. And it's important to have police presence to be able to help these students feel safe. And if you want to help these students develop and have higher rates of success academically, you need to collaborate with police efforts to make this campus safe for these students, so that these unwanted sexual conducts don't occur.
I completely disagree with that. As a student from these communities, having police talk to me about my safety in terms of sexual assault and things like that puts me at even higher anxiety. And with the conversations that I've had with other students in my situation, they completely agree with me. I think the police should not be involved, and I think that we should, in terms of that, we should fully support CARE and programs such as CARE to help these students out. Because LGBTQ students, gender nonconforming students, trans students, students of color do not feel comfortable. Or I'm not going to say all of them, but populations within these communities do not feel comfortable around police, especially around issues such as sexual assault, which can be very touchy issues. Yeah.
Well, how do you prevent these instances from happening? What are the alternatives?
There's a lot of alternatives. So, for example, rape and rape culture and sexual assault are things that need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed not just by the university, but the society as a whole. Our society has something called rape culture that, before I get into this, trigger warning for everybody, rape, sexual assault, things of that nature. Cool. rape culture is basically this thing that blames victims for the things that they've done. It's something that a lot of students, a lot of people just around the nation have experience in, where like police will ask questions such as, "Oh, but you were wearing this," or "You were drunk," blah 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 blah, trying to blame the victim for the problem. There a lot of a, a lot of the conversations that I've had with my friends around this issue, basically what the conclusion that we come to is that police involvement is not always the best thing and the safest thing for all students. Having programs such as CARE, programs such as SHOP, programs that educate the youth, like kids in elementary school, about consent and consent issues are things that we need to focus on, and not pouring more money into the police to tackle these things of sexual assault. Because if we want to talk about sexual assault, we need to get to the problem, because I don't really think that a police officer will be able to stop somebody from sexually assaulting someone, when a lot of the sexual assault that happens from to people by people who they know and who they could be friends with, or family members, or people that they're close to in one way or another. I don't think a police officer would stop that from happening. So I think we need to address this larger issue and not do it through the police. Yes.
Well, as I know you talked about, at a larger scale, there is rape culture, but I'm speaking for UC Santa Cruz specifically. What are the alternatives to having police efforts?
So you were specifically talking about sexual assault, and that's kind of where I drew a problem in. I think that
Yeah. So how do you propose, like, what are the details for you to make these students, specifically LGBTQ, genderqueer, students with disabilities, how do you make them feel safe when they have increased rates of unwanted sexual contact, as opposed to police efforts?
Okay.
In detail.
Well, then, I think my question to you is, what do you mean by police efforts? How is the police going to be helping in this situation? I feel like you're trying to put a voice onto LGBTQ students and gender nonconforming students, and as a student within both of these communities,
this isn't just gender. This is
know,
also students with
and I'm not going to address students with disabilities because I'm not a student who has some sort of physical difference of physical abilities as to other people. I am specifically talking about LGBTQ, gender nonconforming students, because I fit in both of those populations. And what you're making it sound like is that, and I might be taking this out of context, and I'm sorry if I am, but it's making it sound like you are saying that my safety as a student within this doesn't necessarily matter, and that's very problematic, especially for the position that we are both running for. Yeah.
What I'm saying is the police are the main people who execute safety efforts, and students from LGBTQ, genderqueer, students with disabilities have had higher rates of unwanted sexual contact. And studies show that students who aren't in a safe environment, that can affect their learning and developmental outcomes. What are the alternatives, since the police are the main people who implement safety at our school? I want to know what alternatives are there to the police, because I don't know what you're referring to as, because you want to get rid of police, but I think we should work with them to prevent these things.
Preventative action, as I mentioned, needs to happen by addressing the root of the problem, which is rape culture. That is a root of the problem. Working with programs such as CARE, which advocate for students about sexual assault. Working with different offices within the administration to address these issues, doing educational events, talking about consent and the importance of consent are ways to address this. My question then is, how are you seeing the police preventing these things from happening? If the police are supposed to be the thing to like enforce laws and stuff like that, how are the police preventing sexual assaults from happening when, as I mentioned before, sexual assaults happens in a lot of the cases through not necessarily people that you don't know, through people who you know, who you trust, and things of that nature? Then how does the police stop that from happening? And why hasn't the police stopped that from happening to the hundreds and thousands of students on this campus, in the history of this campus, who have been sexually assaulted?
Well, in the past, students haven't felt safe, and they felt more vulnerable to sexual attacks because of the lack of safety efforts. And even now, some of these educational programs for rape culture, they're in place, and there are still high incidents of unwanted sexual contact. And I think I just think getting rid of the police entirely would only make it worse. I think we should work alongside them to increase the educational programs to reduce rape culture. Is one of the best ways to go about it. But the police, getting rid of the police is just not the answer. It's working with them that will solve the issue.
Pull this away. We'll move on to a few more questions that we want to do.
So moving off to a little different topic now. Do you support UCSC athletics, and will you vote yes on the Oprah's bills? Hector.
Of course, I support UCSC athletics. Although I'm not a part of any sports team here, my freshman year I used to play soccer on the Oprah's field almost every day. I don't use the gym a lot, but I know students need the break from academics to be able to recuperate from all the stress. So of course I'm going to vote yes on the bills. Yeah.
I think the nature of the bills is problematic. I think that I'm not going to say that I don't support UC Santa Cruz athletics. I don't like moving. That's just me. I totally down to support people who actually enjoy that kind of activity. But I think the way that Oprah has presented this referenda, I think that they kind of need to rework it. I also think that I don't necessarily think students should have. So one of the things that's a problem within like athletics program is that a lot of students within the athletics programs have to pay for a lot of their trips and have to put in a lot of money to be able to compete. I think that the students should not have to do that, and the university should do that. I think the university should draw from their pools of money from wherever they can to help these students, and I don't think that it should be done through student fees, because if it's done through student fees, it's not necessarily helping all of the students, specifically in terms of like sports teams and stuff like that. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, long term, there should be more funding for athletics, I believe. But as far as this bill, I'd support it. Yeah.
In some cultures and ethnic groups, mental health isn't considered a real condition, like it's not. What proposal or plan do you have to improve resources like CAPS, and how do you plan to help students, again, whose cultures and ethnic groups kind of push them away from something like CAPS to even consider that as one of their options? Starting with
So I think that's something that's highly important. As somebody from a culture who highly stigmatizes health services in general, including, this is not to say everyone in my culture is like that, but from like my parents and stuff like that, health doctors and stuff like that are highly stigmatized. That's things that you don't need unless you're like dying. And it has a lot to do with like machismo and stuff like that within, at least present in my family and parts of my community. I think that we need to work on a way to destigmatize mental health, because mental health is something that affects a lot of students. It's something that affects me a lot, and I think that one of the ways that we need to work on that is having a more diverse staff within CAPS, or the psychological services here on campus, for the reason that since we have a diverse population, we need to be able to have people who kind of understand where these students are coming from. So for example, I've gone to CAPS on a number of occasions for different things that I've had to deal with on a personal level, and it's always really awkward addressing certain things with the people who are my counselors, because I'm a gender nonconforming student and they are not gender nonconforming peoples, or even somewhere on the trans spectrum. Same thing with things based out of ethnicity. Sometimes it's very difficult addressing certain issues because of the differences in cultures and differences in the ways that my experience is different from the experiences of the counselor, and I think diversifying that is going to be a priority for the next SUA team / officers, and something that I definitely want to work on. But I think primarily destigmatizing mental health within POC communities and some of the different ethnic spaces would be of very high importance.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues with mental health is just the negative connotations and feelings towards going to see a counselor, someone to help you. Is just that people believe they'll be discriminated against because they'll be looked at as crazy. And I think one of the biggest things we can do is just have some efforts with debunking those myths that just because you go and ask for help for mental help, that you're not a crazy person. You're just a normal person who's going under stress or who's dealing with a certain issue. And I think those efforts would be one of the things that I would like to focus on the most.
So on top of that, I think really just highlighting struggles of students, working with the Disability Resource Center. They're doing a lot of really cool work in terms of mental health right now. They're doing pledges to stop using ableist language, so to using language that has stigmas against mental health and against physical health and stuff like that. So working on that to educate the overall campus community would be something that's really important to do.
Before we get into, we have 2 more questions. Before that, it is 8. Do either of you have, because I know that we said it was supposed to end by 8.
Yeah.
Do either of you have like something like create a keyboard and send up for you? Pull the beaver.
I think I can stick around. I might have to leave after the first question, but let's continue.
Okay.
So going back to funding for undocumented students, Ellie, you stated that private donors pose many obstacles for these students. What then is the best alternative in your opinion?
I think that's a very complicated question to think about. I'm not necessarily saying that private donors are a bad thing for us to approach. I think that we just have to be very cognizant of the way that we're approaching them and that they're approaching us and their responses to these requests. I think possibly doing some sort of more, instead of going to private donors, doing more community outreach to different communities to get more grassroots help, in a sense of smaller donations from larger fields of population. So kind of grassroots organizing around that to get funds for it. So things of that nature, I think, would probably be better. But again, just in terms of addressing private donors, just thinking about just being cognizant of the ways that we're having conversations with them and the ways that they're responding, so that they don't put our students who need this help into precarious situations?
Yeah, well, often people look at, when they think of private donors, they'll think of rich, just ultra rich people that, they just don't know the struggles of undocumented students, and they don't want to help them really. But private funding overall it doesn't exclude smaller communities. When I said we should outreach to more private funding for undocumented students, that doesn't exclude smaller communities. I'd like to outreach to all sorts of private fundings that we could get, without excluding a certain private funder.
Okay. Currently, there exist conditions on funding which discourages the 6 minority resource centers from collaboration, and in a significant way forbids them from collaborating with the Big 5 ethnic orgs. What will you do to remedy this situation? And we'll start with Hector.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so currently there exist conditions on funding which discourages the 6 minority resource centers from collaboration with the Big 5 ethnic orgs.
Mm-hmm.
So what will you do to remedy the situation?
Do you mind if you go first while I collect my thoughts?
I also need a moment to collect my thoughts.
Take your time.
It's fine.
This isn't really an issue that I've put much thought into. I actually wasn't aware that there were. I know with a lot of funding, there do come the constraints, and I'll admit I don't know those constraints for those. And what I would like to do is find that out and talk to these orgs and see what we can do to move forward.
I think that the constraints are something that really needs to be addressed. I think that I would love to have the support of the resource centers in terms of organizing politically with some of the different ethnic, or some of the Big 5 organizations and stuff like that. But it's very difficult because these resource centers provide a space for students, and it's a very important space. So they have to exist within the bureaucracy, which is our university. We have to abide by all of those law or rules and regulations and stuff like that. But I think that it's a very precarious situation for them to help organizing politically, working with some of the different Big 5 organizations, because the resources that they provide are very important. For example, I use the Cantu Queer Resource Center a lot. It's, for me, has been one of the, it's kind of where I centralize myself on this campus. And that's how resource centers are for a lot of students. So I think that those spaces are needed, and the fact it puts them in a precarious situation to try to organize with them. But I think what we can do is address the constraints by putting pressure on administration on both the sides of the students, on the sides of the people who work within these resource centers. To be like, hey, we want to be able to organize together because we're facing some of the same issues, and then going off of that to put pressure on the administration to take away those funding constraints, because I do not believe that those funding constraints should be there.
I think obviously whatever those constraints are, which I think putting pressure on the administration is obviously one of the big answers. But what are the constraints?
I'm not super aware of them. I've never actually worked within them, but from my understanding, it has some stuff to do with constraints on political organizing and stuff like that. They do put a lot of those constraints also on some of the Big 5, because they also work within the bureaucracy of the university or the administration of the university, so they can't do the organizing to the level that they can do. In terms of funding specifically, I'm not too 100% sure what they are, because I also haven't really worked with any of the research centers, but from
I just thought you said you didn't know. Sorry.
No.
So, we're gonna cut questions there. If anyone in the audience has any more questions, I'm sure that or starting with Hector.
You can start.
Or you would.
So during my time here on this campus, I've done a lot of organizing with a lot of different communities. I've been a part of Familia X, which is a queer Latinx organization, queer and trans Latinx organization. I've facilitated that for 2 years now. I'm facilitating the Queer and Trans People of Color Collective. I work with organizations such as Students for Justice in Palestine, and work with them and stand with them in solidarity with other organizations on this campus, including the Sikh Student Association, the Muslim Student Association, groups such as CSPES, the Armenian Student Association, and a bunch of other groups. On top of that, I've also worked with the student government, both as a Porter College representative for the SUA. I also sit on the student committee on committees, which is a part of the SUA to appoint students to different administrative committees so that they're able to listen to the student voice. And I think given all of this organizing that I've done both within marginalized spaces of marginalized students and the space within the student government, I think that I am a perfectly qualified candidate to take up the position of diversity and inclusion, and I hope to get your support. Cool.
Yeah. Well, as a first-generation Hispanic student, I had a lot of obstacles when first of all, just reaching UC. I had to navigate all the obstacles, which just applying to college is even like its own learning process itself. Once you actually get to a UC, there's so much stuff that's not learned in the classroom that you have to become familiar with, and it's extra hard when you're a first generation student when you don't have the leadership from someone who's done it already. My efforts have been towards alleviating those problems through the outreach that I've done with the STEM programs, the peer mentorship I do for undergraduate researchers, all the chancellors, all the work I do on the Chancellor's Diversity Advisory Council, and throughout all this work, some of the most impactful and more inspiring things for me is when I'm able to have one-on-one conversations with these students that face these issues. One of the most impactful instances, I had this conversation with a girl from a school in Salinas. We after giving lab tour, I was able to give her a tour of the whole campus, and she showed a lot of interest. And we probably toured the school for maybe an hour and a half. I mean, UC Santa Cruz is huge. She was just one of the brightest girls I've ever met, and she reminded me a lot of my little sister. And one of the most impactful things she told me, she said, "Have you ever heard of this book? I forget what the title is. It's about where HeLa cells were derived from." And she told me about this book, and I said, "I've heard of HeLa cells, but I've never heard of this book." And she's maybe like 13 or 14. She tells me, "Well, actually, this book is about how these cells were collected from this person without her consent, and it's her biography." And I go, "Wow, like this is yeah, exactly." And I'm like, wow, I've been involved in research for so long, and I'm so involved in the sciences, and this little girl who's 13, and she's facing all these obstacles. She knows more about this science topic than me. Like, this girl deserves opportunity, and like it's things like that inspire me to do the work that I do every single day. And I hope that people can see that I genuinely want to help students of underrepresented backgrounds succeed at the school, and I want to help them succeed, and I want to celebrate the diversity that they bring to the school, because that's why I'm proud to say I'm a slug, because of that environment at the school.
Great. Thank you so much, candidates and audience, for coming. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep. Great. no problem. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, really good actually. Awesome. Cool. Hey. Thanks. Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.